Welcome everyone to this Continuent webinar. My name is Chris Parker. I'm the Director of Professional Services for the EMEA and APAC regions here at Continuent. In today's webinar, we're going to look at the new composite multi-master in our latest V6 release of Tungsten Clustering. Just before we get started though, I just got a little bit of housekeeping to get out of the way. This session is being recorded, and following today's session, it'll be available to watch again on demand via our website at continuent.com or via our YouTube channel. If you are watching this live broadcast, the slides are also available for you to download from the control panel, and you can also ask questions if you wish. If I have time at the end, I'll go through the questions and give the answers. Otherwise, we'll collate them all together and we'll post them out as a blog post to everyone following the broadcast. If you're actually watching this on demand via the website or YouTube and you wish to ask questions, at the very end, the last slide will have our email addresses, so feel free to send any questions you want that way instead. Okay, with that out of the way, let's get started. So in this session, we're going to start just a quick recap of the new features available in version 6, and then we're going to start to dig a little deeper into the composite multi-master topology. This is probably the biggest change in version 6, hence why we're having this deep dive session today. We want to show you the key changes, especially useful if you are a current customer using V5 or any of our early releases of our multi-site, multi-master solution. We'll also take a look at the configuration for setting up a cluster. I'll explain a little more detail around how our cross-site replication works, how the connectors work together, and I'll also give you a demo so you can actually see it live rather than death by PowerPoint, because we all love that. So there's a bit of a recap. We ran a webinar last week giving a higher level view of the changes and the new features in both the replicator and the clustering in V6. But specifically today, I'm going to focus on the multi-master topology. So many things have changed. First, the easy bit, the name. We've simplified the products and package names simply to Tungsten Clustering and Tungsten Replicator. And many of you will be familiar with the terminology multi-site, multi-master that we've used for quite a few years now. Well, going forward, we've shortened that, and you're just going to hear us refer to this topology more simply as just multi-master. If you're currently running a standard standalone cluster or our composite cluster for HADR, then you probably won't see any major difference in the way that you operate and manage and install the cluster. Obviously, under the covers, there have been a lot of improvements and bug fixes, so I do urge you to study the release notes to see a list of all of these changes. With multi-master, we've massively overhauled the way things work. We've simplified the installation for a start. The multi-master topology in V6 is now a much more cohesive and unified topology where each cluster is fully aware of each other, and the connectors are also aware of all of the clusters rather than just the specific one that they were installed against. In V5 or earlier, for example, the connectors could only be associated with one cluster, and to change that was complicated, required configuration changes, etc. But now in V6, the connectors will know if their local cluster is down, and depending upon how you configure them, they will automatically connect and reroute you to the other clusters without any reconfiguration at runtime. In the old multi-master setup, you may also be familiar with quite a few complex configurations with the need to install both the clustering and then the replication software to manually build out a lot of combinations of services to connect the clusters. And when with 3, 4 more clusters, this became very complex and potentially very easy to get wrong. The monitoring was complicated, failures were sometimes complicated to diagnose, and each cluster was effectively operating as a standalone cluster, strung together by the addition of these replicators. All of this has changed in V6, and it is now all completed in one simple installation. It's all kept together, everything knows about everything, and you no longer need these additional replicators. And with a more complete view of the cluster available within CCTRL, it means it's much easier to detect and manage both failures and recovery. So let's have a quick look at the key configuration parameters to install multi-master. Again, if you're familiar with V5, you will recall that setting up multi-site multi-master was quite a task. You'd have to configure each cluster independently and install the copy of the replicator. You know, I've already mentioned this, and I'll say it a few times just to make sure that we get that through. So this meant it was complicated. You had to build out all these complicated service blocks, and that led to confusion, misconfiguration, and it also meant a complicated installation. So in the new world of V6, everything becomes simple. So gone are the days of having to install the additional replicator and work out all the relevant configuration blocks. In V6, we do that for you. Gone are the days of having to individually set the THL and the RMI ports for the replicators and hoping you get them matching across nodes and not in conflict. In V6, we do that for you. So all you have now, at a minimum, 3 lines in the config file links your clusters together. So let's take a quick look. What does that look like? Well, here we are. This is what the old multi-site, multi-master configuration looked like. The defaults block for the actual replicator. So this was where you specified any default specific to the additional replicator install that you had, and the op replicator home, and this executable prefix for running trepctl against the cross-site replicators. And then you had all of these blocks here. You had to build these out yourself to link your clusters together. So this block linked NYC and London, and this one was London NYC, and you had to get these THL ports and everything, and all this lot you had to get correct. Well, what does it look like in V6? There we go. The replicator default section has gone, and all you have are these 3 lines. So what are these 3 lines? Well, in my example here, global, this is the name that I've chosen for my composite service. This can be any alphanumeric string you like. Next, topology. That's fairly straightforward. We're saying this is a composite multi-master. And finally, composite data source. Here we specify the clusters that make up our composite multi-master cluster. The names listed here, the service names defined here, so London and NYC, and we just specify them here, and they define the nodes within each cluster. Now imagine if you had 3, 4, or 5 clusters, it's much simpler and cleaner. You just define additional blocks for the node. So another block you could add, for example, Tokyo with 3 more nodes, and then you'll just add in Tokyo onto this line, do an update, you've got that extra block there. So if we don't have to supply all these extra replicator blocks, what happens instead? Well, this is all built into the software. Those 3 lines here that you see, they're the key to all the magic that takes place behind the scenes to configure this cross-site replication. So let's start taking a quick look at that. So they're automatically configured, as I said a few times now, and they're all kept together within the same replicator process. What this means that you're already familiar with trepctl, so you don't need to worry about trepctl for your local replicators and trepctl for your cross sites. That single trepctl will give you the view of everything. Because of that, it also means that we've got that complete view within ccTOL, and I'll show you this in the demo shortly. One of the key difference here is actually traffic levels going across the clusters. Now, in V5 multi-site, multi-master, each node could potentially have a different source from the remote cluster for its updates. So one DB1, for example, could pull from DB4, and DB2 could pull from DB6. It was a bit of an edge case for that to happen, but it could potentially happen, and that sometimes caused it could cause confusion when you're looking at the clusters to think where is this coming from and why we've got different pipelines, and it could also obviously overhead. You've got multiple network communication, and if you already have limited bandwidth, you start to see a lot of latency creeping in between the 2 clusters. Well, in V6, it's much more streamlined now. We only have 1 node as the source and 1 for the target for that cross-site cluster communication, and that's the masters. So the master in each node also becomes the relay for traffic from the remote cluster or clusters. The slaves in each node then receive replication from their own local master. So let's just take a quick look at this. So here we have 2 clusters, NYC and London. I'm going to be using NYC and London quite a lot through my demo as well. So right now, simply put, writes into each master flow down to their respective local slaves. So this is how cluster replication always has worked and still continues to work. Okay, so let's add this cross-site replication in. What happens? Well, here we have the link between the 2 clusters. As we've already learned, we create this link for you based on the service names of the clusters. So in my example, I've got New York and London as my local cluster services. Therefore, the installation has automatically created the NYC from London link, which is a service name. And that's the flow of updates coming from the London cluster into NYC. And then we have the London from NYC, obviously, which is the reverse. And as you can see, we have that link purely between the masters. So the masters send the information, and then from the master, that gets disseminated down to the local slaves. So we only have this 1 link in each direction for this cross-site. So we've reduced the network. And then obviously, Let's add more clusters. We just simply keep automatically creating and configuring those cluster links for you. So here, this is obviously a single block, but imagine that's a cluster, cluster, cluster. We create all these cross-site links for you, and all of this communication is purely going between the masters. Now, support for 3 or more clusters in Multimaster won't be available until 6.01. So look out for that if you want more than 2 clusters. We're expecting 6.01 to be within sort of 6 to 8 weeks time frame from today, from the 18th of April. Keep an eye out for updates on when that's released. Okay, let's dive in and actually demo this. I think that might make things a little bit better. So I'm just going to switch my screens. Okay, and I need to open up this. Okay, so what do I have here? Well, I've got, as you can see, I've got 3 sessions. If any of you have watched any of my training sessions before, you'll be quite familiar with my layout. I have DB1, DB2, DB3. This is forming my NYC, my New York cluster. And then I have over here DB4, DB5, DB6, which is my my London cluster. Now, what I've got, I've been using Sysbench. I've done some load into these data, so I've got some load flowing through. But what I want to show you is just show you the config file. So just cat etc tungsten ini. You're obviously all familiar with that. So it's exactly like the one I had on the slide deck. We have the default section, we have the NYC section, which is specifying that block, and then we have the London section, and then we have our composite joining them together. Very, very straightforward. Okay, now CCTRL. If you're familiar with the earlier releases of the product, you'll realize that if you want to view a particular cluster, you would need to go into CCTRL from one of the nodes within that cluster. So for example, let me open up DB2 here, and let me open up CCTRL. Okay, and you log in, and DB2 is part of the NYC cluster, so I'm within NYC. So I look at LS, and we have the information there, data sources, DB1 is the master, DB2 slave, DB3 slave, etc. And then if you're, again, obviously, if you're running the older versions, if you wanted to look at the London cluster, you would have to go into CCTRL on one of the London nodes, and sure enough, there you are taken into London. Now, that's the default entry point for CCTRL. However, because we now have this unified, cohesive view of everything, you don't need to jump around to different nodes to see different clusters. I'm just going to exit out of there. I'm just going to go back to my DB2 node here. So I'm in NYC, I'm on DB2, and I'm like, actually, I want to look at London. So I'm just going to use London, if I can type. And that drops me across, and now I can see London, and I'm still connected from DB2, so I can see the state. And then, of course, you have all your normal commands, your switch, shunning, recovery, can all be done from here. Remember in the config file, we had that global section, our composite cluster. Well, that's actually a service name, and that's a service name we can view within CCTRL. So we can do use global. And here we can now see higher level, we can see our cluster. So we have London, it's the composite master, and we're online. And within London, we have the London service, and this is related to our nodes, DB 4, 5, and 6 for London, and our local replication within it. And then we have the link that comes London from NYC. So this is related to the relay of information coming into London from NYC. And then similarly, we have NYC, and we have the same set of information. So NYC, and then NYC from London. And we have what we call our global progress. Okay, so you're familiar, if you look at nodes within a cluster, you'll be familiar with seeing the progress of where we are within replication. So now we have the local progress here, and then we have the relay progress here. Global progress is the sum of these two. Okay, and that's just so we can see that actually we're all up to date. Everything is good. We're where we should be, and we have the same matching information down here. So we have the local progress here, which does actually map this local progress in NYC should match your progress in London from NYC, because that's the source for this feed. Okay, so 4484, 4484, and then vice versa. So London 602, NYC from London 602, and these global progresses match. So here we can see this global view. Okay, whilst I'm in here, let's talk about maintenance mode. So you're all familiar, whenever you do any form of maintenance on your cluster, you need to set your cluster into maintenance mode. So you would go to your cluster and you say, oh, well, NYC, I need to change the policy into maintenance. Great, that hasn't changed, that works. And if we look at this now, NYC is in maintenance mode. But what we have now is a status at the bottom which tells us why we're in maintenance mode. And in this case, manual operation. In a moment, I will do a switch and a failover, and you'll see different statuses there. So sometimes, if you're looking at this cluster, but maybe one of your colleagues has done some work and suddenly thinking, well, why is my cluster in maintenance mode? I've not done it. Have a look down here. You might find out it could be a manual operation like what I've just done, or it could indeed be the result of some of the rules firing within the manager and it's doing things in the background. So we'll always let you know what's gone on. Now, because we have this global level, if you wanted to set both NYC and London to maintenance mode, you don't need to go to NYC and set the policy, then go to London and set the policy. You can actually just do it up here at the global level. You see at the moment it's now saying London is in automatic, NYC is in maintenance, and our overall state is mixed. Well, actually, if you want, you could just do it all from here. Set policy maintenance at this high level, and that will just trickle down and it will set everything under it to maintenance. Similarly, set policy automatic at this level, and it will set both my clusters, excuse me, set both my clusters down into automatic. So we're getting a lot more control from one single point without having to jump around. Okay, let's drop out of ccTRL for the time being. We will come back to that shortly, and let's start looking at the replicators. So let me just clear my screen and let me send all my output to the same place. So you're familiar with trepctl. Now, trepctl is still there, but obviously now trepctl is controlling both local replication and it's also controlling our remote replication. So first of all, we can just do trepctl services. And there we see reported back the first service NYC. We're online, and this is our sequence number, applied last sequence number. And then we can see the service NYC from London, which is our cross-site. So now you can repeat that trepctl command service. We can specify the service we want to look at, and then status. You're very familiar. This is a command you probably run a lot anyway, and there you have the normal output that you're familiar with. And then if you want to do the NYC from London, oops, there we go. That's your replication view of your cross-site. And let's look at the pipeline here. I mentioned in one of the slides about how we've reduced the network chatter. We only have that one link across. As you can see, my two slaves, DB2 and DB3, their pipeline is DB1. DB1, its pipeline is DB4, which is the master in the other cluster. And if I go to that other cluster and we run that same command, trepctl services, you can see here we have London from NYC. So trepctl service London from NYC. Status helps on the end, Chris. And there we can see 5 and 6. Their pipeline is DB4, which is the master, DB4 pipeline DB1, which is the master in NYC. Okay, so from here, all the commands that you're familiar with now, with controlling the replicators, the online, offline, the resets, all exactly the same. Just need to make sure you put in the service. Okay, and then obviously we have the refresh options. I'm not sure with anyone. These came in 5.3 release. I think this came in 5.2 or 5.3. So if you're familiar, you can do -R on the end and a value, and that will just refresh that output for you every however many seconds you issue there. So this is our status of London from NYC. So let me just go on to my master in NYC, and let me just fire off some more load through it, and we'll see applied last sequence number is increasing. Everything is going good. Okay, so let's drop out of there, and so let's have a look at failures and switches. Well, failures, well, first of all, switches, they work exactly the same. Okay, there's no difference here at all. So I'll just go into CCTRL. I'm going to be in London, so I'll just do a switch. Okay, I can do switch 2 or switch. Just go through the normal process, and we'll just let that do its thing. For a second there, just make sure we're good here. I'm just going to open up a CCTRL connection over here. Oops, so we can monitor what's going on. Here's London. Okay, you see here, we've gone into maintenance mode because we're doing a switch. Reason for maintenance, switching the primary. Okay, so once that's completed, then we put DB5 in. Once it's finished these processes, there's sometimes maybe 30 seconds before it puts it back into automatic mode. It doesn't mean that the cluster isn't operational. We just give it a little bit of time, just once you've done that switch, to let things settle down before we put it back into automatic. Sometimes if you bring it into automatic too soon and it hasn't finished doing what it's doing, we've sometimes seen issues in early releases. So we just have a little bit of a grace period before we put it back into automatic. So if we look at this now, we're back into automatic, that line is gone, and DB5 is now our master. Okay, so before I actually do a failure, I want to talk about connectors. I've not talked about them yet. Now, previously, I've got my connectors locally on my database nodes, and traditionally your connector that you specify during your installation. So if I bring up my config file again for you, oops. So in here, connectors DB1, DB2, DB3 associated with NYC and 456 with London. Now in older releases, in the multi-site multi-master in version 5, these connectors would only be aware of NYC, and these connectors would only be aware of London. That was it. There was no other. They weren't. They couldn't view cross clusters. They had no awareness of anything else. So if we look in CCTRL, we can actually see all of the connectors are now listed, DB1 through to DB6 for each cluster, because these connectors are now cluster aware, because we've got everything together in one place with this cross-site communication. So if I go into my London cluster, I'm just going to drop out of here, okay, and I'm just going to do a MySQL. I've got to use one here. I'm going to just connect locally, which is going to put me through the connector, specify the port. Okay, and I just select host name. I'm in bridge mode. I'm not doing anything fancy, any routing or anything. I'm just basic bridge mode, and it's taken me into DB5. DB5 is the new master. That's fine. So let's drop out of here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to force a failure. So I'm just going to kill the MySQL process on my master, which is DB5. And let's go over and have a look here. And here we go, right? DB5 master shunned, failed over to DB4. DB4 is the master. Reason for maintenance, switch primary. So, we'll wait for that. Eventually, give it a minute or two to get itself back into automatic mode and to finish cleaning itself up after this failure. Let's say we have that grace period whilst we would let things settle down after this failure. Okay, everything's good there. So if we go to back to this cluster, and let's rerun that MySQL command. We'll just check that our connectors have gone the right way, which we are certain they will have done. Select hostname. Okay, sure enough, our connectors are going back to DB4. We're familiar with that. That's great. But what happens if we lost this whole cluster? Okay, well, let's just do this. Let's do sudo service MySQL d stop. So we've lost all of our nodes in this cluster. Wait for that to finish. Now, if we look in CCTRL over here, we can see the entire cluster is down. We're stopped. It's gone. Okay, and if we look at global, we can see London composite master failed. Okay, everything is shunned. Everything is gone down. So what's that done with the connectors? Well, my connectors are still running. I didn't do a stop on them, so let's find out. So if we do control, let's do MySQL. we've now been routed over to the other cluster. We didn't do anything. That your application, so to say, it hasn't done anything. The connectors know that the cluster is gone, but it knows there is another cluster available, so your connectors have gone over there. All of this out of the box as it stands. Okay. They are the biggest. I think this, personally for me, the ability to have these connectors automatically routing you to other clusters is a big game changer for us. And having this multi-master cohesive view of everything, I think you'll agree that when you start to use this, you'll realize how much of a stepped improvement it is on 5.3 and early releases of multi-site, multi-master. Yes, multi-site, multi-master worked, and it worked very well. But most customers would agree that it's complicated, and you really have to know where everything is and how everything is linked together, and you have to fully understand all the potential pitfalls of getting port numbers clashed and network links wrong and things like that. This makes things a lot easier. So let's just go back to our slide deck. I want to go to that one. Okay. So final slide, installation and upgrades. If you're currently running or wish to run a single standalone cluster or the composite cluster for HADR, then you can upgrade from any 4.x release, and both the staging and INI methods of installation are fully supported. If you're upgrading a multi-site, multi-master, then you need to be at a minimum of 4.7 to upgrade. Okay, so anything earlier than that, you'll need to go to 4.7 first. In addition, at the moment, V6 currently only supports the INI method of installation. So if you're on a staging install, you'll need to convert to INI. Now, that is something that we are hoping to bring into later 6 releases to be able to support staging. But as it stands right now, it's INI only. Now, we did run a training session yesterday, and we have lots of extensive documentation on how to do upgrades, and we also have videos and documentation on how to convert from staging to INI. So do head to our docs page, the link is there, and check that out. Prerequisites, nothing has really changed from previous releases, or at least from 5.3. There was quite a lot of new prereqs that came in at the 5 level, version 5 level. So if you're already on one of those version 5 releases, the only thing you need to be aware of is that Java 7 is no longer supported. So for version 6 of clustering, you will need to upgrade to Java 8, and that's applicable for multi-master, standard clusters, composite clusters, and even standalone replicator. Everything needs to be Java 8. It goes without saying, though, in all cases, please do read and study our online documentation, study the release notes. Here you'll find any current known issues and more detailed lists of any of the new features and bug fixes that are in this release as well. It's with 33 minutes, I'm a little tiny bit over. I just want to see if there are any questions here. How does the multi-master consolidation affect the time to switch a master in a single cluster? From the example, it seems like there's an additional. Obviously, when you are doing a switch, the cross-site replicators need to be updated. Now, when in version 5.3, when you were doing a switch, a lot of that was still happening. It doesn't change any of that. It's just more visible for you now that it's going through that process. But I know there's been a lot of work on trying to speed the switches up. So we'll get back to you with more information on that. I know there are a couple of questions still around the switch time. Does the connector route across clusters? Yeah, obviously we've just talked. I've just demonstrated that. If you have more than 2 clusters, as I said, obviously 601 that'll be supported. There will be options to set. Hopefully it gets into 601 where you can set the affinity. So, for example, if your connectors are in London, you lose London, you can set the priority of which do you want to fail to, NYC or say Tokyo. So you'll be able to hopefully control that failover. At the moment, obviously it's only 2 clusters, so it's just going to go across to the other cluster. But also there are lots and lots of configuration options within the connectors anyway, and there are many different ways you can control this. What I showed you was just basic out-the-box bridge mode. So maybe not related specifically to the new release, but wondering if you considered offering connector and manager but using native MySQL replication. Stay tuned. That's all I'm going to say on that right now. Stay tuned. That has been asked a few times. It is something that we are talking about extensively internally, but I don't have any concrete plans. I can't concretely say yes, we are doing it, or no, we're not doing it. But yeah, stay tuned. It's something we are talking about internally. Okay, let's have a look. I think that's the last one. Yeah. So next steps. If you're a customer and you want to upgrade, then please do get in touch via the support system. The upgrade from multi-site Multimaster to Multimaster is very detailed. There's a lot of steps, and you've got to be very, very careful. So don't do it alone. Get in touch with us. Let us help you. We'll go through it in a staging environment, dev environment. Go through it as many times as you want to make sure you're comfortable and ready for the process. If you're not a customer and you are interested in knowing more, then get in touch with us, sales@continuent.com. And there you've got all our links for white papers, our documentation, our webinars, training sessions are online. We're all over social media. Follow us, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, everywhere you can find us, we're there. So do follow us and look out for updates as and when they come. And that's it. That was my last slide. So thank you very much for your time today. I hope you found it useful. All our contact details are there. As I said, my name again, Chris Parker, is my email address. If you have any questions, please do let me know. So once again, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day in whichever time zone you're in, and goodbye.